All right, welcome back. Should be a pretty short video. Oilers trade needs at the deadline. I don't have an Oilers jersey or an Oilers hat, so I'm wearing the Sharks because they've been connected to my boy Eric Carlson. Got the Wild hat because they've been connected to my other boy Matt Dumba. Let's talk about it. Oilers, just over $500,000 in cap space available, so should they make a trade, it's pretty much going to have to be a dollar in, dollar out trade. They have contracts they can trade out to make cap space. To kind of make the money work, notably Jesse Puljujarvi, $3 million against the cap. That would help make a dent. The forward group, I'm not too concerned about, to be honest. They're scoring at a pretty good clip. The power play is and has been lethal for years. That hasn't changed. And even 5-on-5, they're still playing pretty well. Better, I think, ever since they acquired Evander Kane, and I'm not saying he's the reason because they've played well without him this year, but 5-on-5 play has drastically improved with this team. You also have Zach Hyman going off this year. We didn't see a whole lot of his talent, skill in Toronto. Raised some eyebrows when that contract was signed in Edmonton, but that contract's aging well. He's looking great over in Edmonton. He's creating his own goals. He's not relying on McDavid and Draisaitl for his offensive stats like you would expect. He's playing well, man. Really fun forward to watch. Nugent Hopkins, Evander Kane, we all know what they are. You got McDavid, Draisaitl, two of the best scorers in the entire league. McDavid, Draisaitl, Draisaitl consistently a 50-plus goal scorer. McDavid leading the league in goals to this point, should exceed 50 goals easily this year. I think he's on pace for like 64 or something like that, something crazy. So great. Their goaltending, and I didn't even put it up here. Jack Campbell, Stuart Skinner. Stuart Skinner has shown he's the number one goaltender in Edmonton. That happened months ago. Jack Campbell still struggling to find his game. And this has kind of been an ongoing issue with the Oilers. Their goaltending has always been a bit of an issue. But how much of an issue is yet to be seen. Right? They go out, they sign Jack Campbell, they think it's the solution in net, and then you have some guy from the AHL, Stuart Skinner, come up and take over the number one spot. So what's going on? I think it's pretty straightforward. It's the defense. Actually, we saw this with the Minnesota Wild. The first few games they played throughout the season, to begin the season, was it like 3 or 4 games? They gave up 7 or more goals in every game. That was brutal. It was just brutal. It was brutal to watch. Dean Evason, the head coach of the Minnesota Wild, came out and said, that's not necessarily on the goaltenders. Our defense was awful. We need to play better defensively, and we need to play better team defense to help our defenseman and goaltender get bailed out, essentially. The Wild took note, and it started to work, and now they're winning games with their defense because they're struggling to put the puck in the net. A defense can really help change a team and make it a contender. So with the Oilers, I'm not too worried about their goaltending with Stuart Skinner. I think he's fine. I think Jack Campbell will bounce back at some point. I don't think he's going to be the elite Vezina player they were hoping he would be, but I think he will definitely bounce back and at the very, very minimum be a serviceable backup. I think next year, I'm anticipating it'll be a 1A, 1B scenario, but we'll see what happens with them. We'll see. Their offense is fantastic. It's their defense that I have a lot of questions about. They need to acquire a top 4 defenseman. So they have Darnell Nurse. We all know he's overpaid. He has the ability to play elite defense. We've seen it. We've seen flashes of it. But at the same time, he can be a liability in the defensive zone. You don't know what you're going to get from Darnell Nurse between every shift. You don't. Darnell Nurse needs to be more of a consistent player. He's skilled offensively. He's skilled defensively. He has to put those two together and play a whole 60 minutes. That's what you expect out of a guy making $9+ million that he is, a top line pairing defenseman. He's a great player. He just needs to put it together for an entire game, night in and night out. And he doesn't do that on a consistent basis. So a little bit of a concern there. I'm not overly concerned with Darnell Nurse. I am a little higher than most people on Darnell Nurse. I really like him. Cody Cece, he's played fine on the first line as a defenseman, but I wouldn't have him as a first line defenseman. He excelled in Pittsburgh on a third pairing line with Chad Ruhwedel. They were excellent. It was a shutdown defensive pairing. That's kind of what Cody Cece's more suited for. Definitely a bottom four defensive player. With that being said, though, he hasn't really played all that poorly. At times can be a bit of a defensive liability in his own zone, but it's not nearly as, now we're kind of just grasping at straws, right? He's been pretty solid for the most part. Same with Kulak. I like Kulak quite a bit. I thought he was more of a third line pairing defenseman, but he's played well in that second line role with Tyson Barrie. Tyson Barrie, though, he's an offensive defenseman. He is a defensive liability more often than not, and that's kind of what you expect with an offensive defenseman. He's there to put up points. He's there to add to your offense. But what you're gaining in offense, you're also losing in defense. That's just been Tyson Barrie his entire career. Fine. At least you know what you're going to get with him. So you can't be too upset. And then on the last line, you got Broberg and Bouchard, both really young guys. Bouchard seeing more minutes than Broberg. I think Bouchard has he's averaging 3.5 or 4 more minutes a game over Broberg. Nonetheless, two very young defensemen with a lot of promise. I love both of these guys. I'm really, really high on Bouchard. I love Bouchard. But Broberg's look good too. And then you got Desharnais as a depth guy at this point. Ryan Murray, also a depth guy. He's on the IR. Another player on the IR is Klefbom. We're not expecting him to come back at any point. Sad, but ever since Klefbom's gone on the IR years ago, the Oilers have missed Klefbom on that blue line. I love watching Klefbom. But nonetheless, this third line depth, and some of these guys will swap in and out. I'm just going to call it the third line. They're very young kids. They're very young kids with limited NHL experience. There's going to be issues defensively. There's going to be mistakes. That's kind of what you expect with a younger prospect entering the NHL on the defensive side of the puck. It's just, it happens, and it happens to really every young player. We've seen that with Owen Power this year, right? Number 1 overall, highly touted pick, played collegiate hockey, still making quite a few mistakes in his own defensive zone. Improving, yes, and these guys, all three of these guys, have improved since their first shift, and it's noticeable. But there's still a long way to go. So you got to shore that up. I guess we're on a kick of relating to the Minnesota Wild, probably because I'm wearing the hat there just in my mind. But the Minnesota Wild, with their third pairing defensemen, where they have Goligoski, more of a depth guy, John Merrill, and Kalen Addison. We've seen that third line play poorly in their own defensive zone and lose games for the Minnesota Wild, and they were the only line that gets scored on. The other two defensive lines, fine. They're not that they played well, but that third pairing line, more of a liability than an asset, and that's caused them to lose games. So you got to shore some of this up. If you're the Edmonton Oilers, you got to get some type of stay-at-home defenseman. Maybe you have a stay-at-home defensive line. We saw that work really well in Pittsburgh with Ruhwedel and Cece, having two defensive defensemen on that third line. They can play against anybody and shut them down for the most part. Sure, they're not elite, but they're very good playing in their own zone. And if one makes a mistake, you have another reliable defensive defenseman to kind of cover for that mistake. So again, we've seen it work in Pittsburgh. We've seen it work throughout the league. It's a thought. But let's see. You got Nurse, can be a defensive liability at times. Cece, not so much a defensive liability. Kulak, fine. Tyson Barrie, defensive liability, no doubt. Broberg and Bouchard, definitely defensive liabilities at times. Same with Desharnais. But, I don't want to throw shade at the young guys because I think all three of these guys have a lot of promise. and will be assets moving forward. But you got a lot of guys in your prime. You need to make a cup run now. Like it is what it is. So I just wish the Oilers management would do this right. Goaltending, like, fine. Stuart Skinner, fine. That inadvertently worked out for you. But defensive players, like, you're going to go out and get Erik Karlsson. Sure, he'll help your offense. Your offense doesn't need help. That's going to hurt your defense. Karlsson is a great player, but he's an offensive defenseman. He's there to score goals and make some nice passes and help your offense. He's not there to play elite defense. He's never played elite defense. That's not his game. That doesn't address your needs. That actually makes your needs maybe a little more severe on defense. Same with Matt Dumba. Like, Matt Dumba, great two-way defenseman, lost a bit of his offensive side of that game, but can be quite a defensive liability at times in Minnesota. And I think that's why we haven't seen him moved yet. He's a great leader and a great locker room guy. But when it comes to playing consistently solid defense in their own zone, it's an issue. It just is. Right? So I think if we were to see Matt Dumba get moved for a decent haul, we would have already seen it. I don't think Matt Dumba is going to warrant a first overall pick. I just don't. You need to find a defensive defenseman that can play top 4 minutes. It's that simple. Right? You can move Barry to the third line or whatever. I don't know. Maybe you move CC to the second line or third line. I don't know. You can play around with it. There's things you can do. It's kind of a volatile defensive lineup. This has seemed to work for the most part, but it needs to be better. It needs to be improved. And with that being said, the offense, like the forwards of the Oilers, need to play a little better team defensive hockey. It's not terrible. It's really not that bad. But the defensive play, it needs to be more prevalent for this team. It's all offense all the time. And there's some defense there. Like, you got guys like McDavid coming back and playing defense, throwing checks in his own zone along the boards. Right? You got some grit there, but you also have like a handful of guys that don't do a whole lot in their own defensive zone. You need buy-in from your forwards to play team defense. You need your defense to play defense and not focus so much on the offensive side of the puck. You need to play a well-balanced game. We're seeing that with cup contenders, valid cup contenders that may win a Stanley Cup this year. Colorado, we're seeing offensive play be pretty solid and defensive play be pretty solid. Bruins, what are they? Number one offense in the league, number one defense in the league, or something. Toronto, we're seeing that as well. These teams that we consider to be cup contending teams have a well-balanced team. Maybe there's a weaker, maybe like the goaltending's weaker than the offense, but for the most part, everything is well above league average. The Oilers' defense is not. You can't just rely on scoring to win you a cup. Stuart Skinner, probably not going to be the guy to stand on his head and post a .940 save percentage throughout the playoffs. And that's okay. You really shouldn't expect that from any goaltender. But you need to shore up the defense, and you need it to be with a defensive defenseman. So that's just my take. I don't like all the speculation of who the Oilers are looking at. I don't understand, of all people, Erik Karlsson. Like, I get it. Karlsson with Draisaitl and McDavid, especially in overtime, the 3-on-3, that's great. But that's not going to give you the push you need in the Stanley Cup playoffs. You can win by outscoring a team, but there are going to be times where your offense is a bit dried up for a game or two. You're going to lose those games because you don't have a defense to rely on. So, Oilers, get a defensive player, a defensive defenseman. Erik Karlsson, I don't like that. Matt Dumba, I don't like that. Get a defensive defenseman, shore this up, and I'll have a lot more confidence in this team being a cup contending team. Right now, I don't have them being a Stanley Cup contender. They can make a bit of a run in the playoffs, but I don't see them getting past Colorado. Just that simple at this point. Colorado is a better, well-balanced team than the Oilers. The offense, you can make the case that the Oilers is a little better, but that's about it. Defense, goaltending, easily go to Colorado. You got to shore up your defense. So that's it for this. Let me know what you guys think. I need to get an Oilers jersey. I look goofy in this. All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you, and take care.